Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. I never thought my life would turn into something that felt like a secret novel I was ashamed to write, yet couldn't stop living. When I married David, I knew he came with a past, with scars I thought I could help heal, and with a son I had. Only met twice before the wedding. His name was Ethan. He was quiet, reserved, polite in the way young men often are when they don't want to reveal too much. I remember shaking his hand for the first time, thinking nothing beyond the fact that he had his father's eyes. At the time, that was all I saw. Life settled into something ordinary. David and I built a home together. We entertained friends. We played the roles we thought would last us a lifetime. Ethan visited during holidays and weekends, his presence steady but not disruptive, a reminder that I had stepped into a life already partly written. I was determined not to overstep, to respect boundaries, to be supportive but not intrusive. I told myself I was simply the woman who happened to become his father's wife, nothing more. Nothing less, but things never stay that simple, do they? It began with small moments, quiet ones that no one else would notice. The way Ethan lingered a little longer at the dinner table when David excused himself for phone calls. The way his laughter warmed the room in a way I hadn't felt in years. The conversations we shared, often unplanned, often late at night when the house was too quiet and neither of us seemed to want to go to bed. He told me about his struggles in college, about the loneliness that came from pretending to have everything under control. I told him about the pieces of myself I felt I buried when I married his father, the dreams I had let go of, the restlessness I carried silently, and somewhere in that space between confessions and glances, my heart began to shift. I didn't notice it at first. I told myself it was empathy, that I was simply caring, being kind, being there for someone who needed me. But the truth crept in slowly, unbearably. I began to wait for him to come home on weekends. I began to recognize his footsteps in the hallway. I began to feel something alive inside me again, something reckless, something dangerous. The night it all broke open was quiet, almost painfully so. Rain was falling outside, tapping gently against the windows like a secret trying to be told. David had left on a business trip, and Ethan had come home for the weekend earlier than expected. We were sitting in the living room, the glow of the lamp soft around us, talking about nothing and everything. He was telling me about a book he had just finished, his hands moving as he spoke, his eyes alive in a way that caught me completely off guard. I laughed, and then he looked at me, really looked at me with a gaze that felt like it stripped every wall I had built. The silence that followed was unbearable. My heart was pounding so loud I thought you might hear it. I should have stood up. I should have ended the night right there. But instead, I found myself leaning closer without even meaning to. He mirrored the movement, his breath brushing against my skin. And then, before I could even comprehend what I was doing, our lips met. It was not careful. It was not planned. It was a rush of everything we had been holding back, pouring out. In a single desperate touch, I felt years of emptiness dissolve in that kiss. Felt a part of myself I had thought was gone flicker alive. His hands trembled as they held me. Mine shook as they gripped his shirt, but neither of us pulled away. For one endless moment, there was no law, no marriage, no consequences, just us, caught in something too powerful to deny. When we finally broke apart, the weight of what we had done crashed over us. He whispered my name like it was both a prayer and a curse. I pressed my forehead to his, unable to breathe, unable to think of anything but the truth I could no longer ignore. I loved him. Not in the way I was supposed to, not in the way the world would ever accept, but in a way that felt undeniable, uncheckable. My heart had chosen him, and there was no undoing it. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and longing. We tried to stay away from each other, tried to bury what had happened, but every stolen glance, every brush of his hand against mine, every moment alone in the house pulled us back together like magnets. We fought it, we swore it wouldn't happen again. But the heart doesn't obey rules. I loved David in a way, but it was not the same. With him, there was duty, stability, a kind of safety that felt more like silence. With Ethan, there was fire, danger, a passion that made me feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. It was wrong, it was forbidden, but it was also the truest thing I had ever felt. And so, behind closed doors and whispered nights, our love unfolded messy, complicated, unstoppable. Every time he held me, I knew we were risking everything. Every time I looked into his eyes, I knew there was no turning back. We belonged to each other, even if the world would never allow us to say it out loud. He was my stepson by law. But my heart had chosen him long before I had the courage to admit it. The guilt became heavier with every passing day, yet it was matched equally by the pull I felt toward him. It was a paradox I couldn't escape, a secret that lived in the spaces between words and glances. Ethan and I became skilled at pretending. Pretending at breakfast when David was home. Pretending during family gatherings when the three of us sat around the table. Pretending during moments when our hands brushed too close while passing a dish or reaching for the same thing. Every accidental touch was electric, but every electric spark was a danger. We told ourselves to stop countless times. After the first night we kissed, we agreed never to let it happen again. After the second, when my hands clung to him like drown if I let go, we said we'd keep our distance. But distance never lasted. Because the truth was, Ethan and I weren't seeking to ruin anything. We were simply unable to deny what was already there. We were pulled into each other's orbit like two planets too close, destined to collide. One evening, David was away on another one of his endless business trips. He kissed me goodbye at the door, told me he'd be back in 3 days, and left. Like always. I had grown used to those absences, used to the quiet that followed. That night, Ethan came home earlier than usual. I remember the way he lingered in the kitchen doorway, watching me chop vegetables for dinner. His eyes softened, and I saw everything he wasn't saying written across his face. Without a word, he came closer, his hand brushing mine as he reached for the knife. I froze, the sound of the rain outside mixing with the pounding in my heart. We didn't eat dinner that night. We didn't even try. The vegetables sat forgotten on the counter while we crossed the distance between us. I thought I would stop trembling, but I never did. His lips found mine again, hesitant for only a moment before hunger overtook us both. It wasn't just passion, it was need, the kind that lives deep in your bones. For hours we stayed together. The storm outside loud, but nothing compared to the storm inside us. The next morning was different. Sunlight poured through the windows and different to the mess we had made of our hearts. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker, feeling his presence behind me. He wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting lightly on my shoulder. And for the first time, instead of guilt, I felt something dangerously close to peace that terrified me more than anything. Because peace meant permanence. Peace meant I couldn't pretend this was just a mistake. David returned and life resumed its mask. He asked about the week, about work, about Ethan, and I smiled, laughed, and played my part. But every word felt like a lie, every laugh like a betrayal. At night, lying in bed beside him, I thought about the quiet moments I shared with his son, about the way my heart raced when Ethan so much as walked into a room. I hated myself for it, yet I couldn't stop. Love isn't always something you choose. Sometimes it chooses you, cruelly, unfairly, without reason. Months passed. Ethan and I fell into a rhythm, a secret life hidden beneath the ordinary one. We met in shadows, exchanged glances across rooms, whispered things that never should have been said. The more we tried to hold back, the more we fell. He confessed once, late at night when his voice was raw, that he couldn't look at me without imagining a life we could never have. I told him the same. We were both prisoners of something beautiful and tragic. The danger of being caught was constant. Every time the phone rang unexpectedly, my chest tightened. Every time David asked me a question, I couldn't immediately answer. My mind raced with fear. Yet despite the danger, I kept going back to Ethan. We both did. Because whatever this was, it had become more than passion. It had become love, the kind of love that consumes, destroys, rebuilds. The breaking point came one evening when David suggested the three of us take a trip together, a family getaway. The word family nearly undid me. I watched Ethan's expression falter for a second before he quickly masked it with a smile. I agreed, my voice steady while inside everything screamed. Because I knew sitting beside them both, pretending everything was fine, would tear me apart. And yet, even then, even with everything collapsing inside me, I couldn't stop loving him. I couldn't stop choosing him, even silently. He was my stepson by law, yes, but he had become the only person who made me feel alive, who made me feel seen, who reminded me of who I was before the world told me what I was supposed to be. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, I wondered how it would all end. Whether we'd be caught, whether one of us would break, whether the weight of secrecy would suffocate us. But whenever I looked at him, whenever his hand found mine in the dark, all those questions disappeared. All I knew was that my heart had already made its choice, and it was him. Always him. The trip David had suggested loomed over me like a storm I could neither avoid nor prepare for. He was so excited, his voice carrying that boyish enthusiasm that reminded me why I had once fallen for him. He booked a lakeside cabin, a place far from the city where the air would be fresh, the nights quiet, and where, in his mind, we could all bond as a family. I smiled and nodded in all the right places, but inside I was unraveling. When the day came, the drive there was filled with chatter about groceries, fishing, and the books we bring along. Ethan sat in the back seat, his gaze out the window. Most of the time, but I felt his eyes on me in the rearview mirror more than once. Every glance sent a rush through me, a reminder of everything we had done, everything we were hiding. David hummed along with the radio, blissfully unaware. The cabin itself was perfect in its simplicity. Wooden walls, a fireplace, a small dock that stretched into the lake where the water shimmered beneath the setting sun. David busied himself with unpacking while Ethan carried bags inside. When he brushed past me in the narrow hallway, the briefest touch of his hand against mine nearly undid me. My body remembered him before my mind could protest. The first evening, the three of us sat outside, drinking wine while the crickets sang. David told stories, his laughter echoing in the night, while Ethan and I stole glances in the shadows. Every smile he gave me felt like a secret message, every breath shared between us a thread pulling tighter. I wanted to run, yet I wanted nothing more than to fall into him again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered to the kitchen for water, only to find Ethan already there, standing by the counter in the dim glow of the moon through the window. Neither of us spoke at first. We didn't need to. His eyes met mine, and suddenly the silence between us was louder than words. I felt my heart race as he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, intoxicating. My body betrayed me before reason. Could intervene, I reached for him. Our kiss was quiet, desperate, the kind born of too much restraint. His hands cupped my face as if I were something fragile, something sacred, though what we were doing was anything but. We parted only when a floorboard creaked somewhere in the cabin, a reminder that David was only a wall away. We pulled apart, both breathing hard, both wide-eyed with guilt and longing. We didn't speak, just retreated to our rooms, but the taste of him lingered all night. The following days were a torment. We swam in the lake, cooked together, played cards by the fire. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. David was happy, relaxed, joking with his son and holding my hand. But beneath the surface, every moment was charged. When Ethan brushed past me in the kitchen, when his leg accidentally touched mine under the table, when our eyes met and held for a fraction too long, it was unbearable. On the last night, a storm rolled in, heavy rain drumming against the roof. David fell asleep early, his snores muffled in the next room. I sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, trying to quiet the war inside me. Ethan appeared silently, his expression as conflicted as my own. He sat beside me, not too close, not too far. For a long time, we didn't speak. The fire popped, the rain roared, and my heart threatened to give me away. Finally, he whispered, "We can't keep doing this." His voice broke on the words, as if saying them hurt. "I know," I said, though the truth was the opposite. I wanted more. I wanted all of him. His hand reached for mine, his thumb brushing over my knuckles with the gentleness of someone memorizing something they know they might lose. My throat tightened, tears threatening, because I knew this wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a mistake. This was love, raw and consuming, love I had no right to feel. That night, I lay awake listening to the storm, knowing nothing could undo what had begun between us. Even if we tried to stop, even if we buried every touch, every glance, the love was there, pulsing beneath the surface, refusing to die. When we returned home, life resumed its familiar shape, but I was no longer the same. David talked about future plans, about anniversaries and investments, while Ethan and I lingered in silence, carrying an entire world between us that David would never see. Every time I laughed at David's jokes, every time I kissed him goodnight, it felt like I was living someone else's life. Because the truth was, my heart had already left. It had chosen Ethan no matter how wrong, no matter how impossible, and so we kept walking that thin, dangerous line, torn between duty and desire, between the life the world expected of us and the love we could not deny. Each day felt like a test, each moment a secret we had to protect. Yet every secret drew us closer, bound us tighter, until I no longer knew where the lie ended and the truth began. Sometimes I wondered if the day would come when everything would be exposed, when David would see what had been hidden in plain sight. Sometimes I even longed for it, because then at least the pretending would end. But until that day, I carried on, torn between the man I promised myself to and the one my heart had claimed in silence. It was impossible to forget the way his eyes lingered on me, even in the most ordinary moments. At the dinner table, in the living room, when he came home late from work and found me folding laundry, those glances were heavy with unspoken words. Words we both feared yet desperately craved. Every day we carried on as though nothing had changed, as though life was perfectly ordinary, yet beneath that thin layer of normalcy lived a secret that consumed us both. There were nights when David would fall asleep beside me, his arm draped across my waist, his breath steady and even. I would lie there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the knowledge that the warmth of his embrace no longer stirred me. Instead, my heart pounded for the thought of Ethan lying in the room across the hall, awake like me, his mind echoing the same forbidden thoughts. Sometimes, in the quietest hours, I would hear footsteps, his pacing back and forth, as though he too was battling the torment of restraint. It was during one of those nights that everything shifted again. David had gone on a 2-day business trip, a routine conference he attended every year. He kissed me goodbye at the door, left me with a smile and the promise of calling once he landed. I watched him drive away, the sound of the car fading into the distance, and immediately felt the dangerous awareness that I would be alone with Ethan. My hands trembled as I cleared the breakfast table, but my heart betrayed me, fluttering at the possibility of stolen moments. Ethan came home later that evening, drenched from the rain. His shirt clung to him, his hair dripping, and when he stepped into the kitchen, our eyes met with a force that made it impossible to pretend. He stood there for a long moment, water pooling at his feet, and whispered, "I shouldn't be here." "Like this," I swallowed, my voice barely audible. "Neither of us should." But still, I reached for a towel, handed it to him, and when his fingers brushed mine, the dam broke. It was like the storm outside had moved into the house. His arms pulled me against him before I could think, his lips finding mine in a kiss. That was wild and desperate, years of longing crashing together. There was no careful restraint this time, no whispered reminders of guilt. Only heat, only need. Only two people who had been starved of something essential finally giving in. When it was over, We sat in silence, our breathing uneven, our hearts racing. He held my hand, his thumb stroking over my skin as though he was memorizing me, and I rested my head on his shoulder. The guilt came swiftly after the sharp reminder of who we were to each other in the eyes of the world, but the guilt was drowned by the certainty that what we shared was not fleeting. It was real, terrifyingly real. The following days blurred into a dangerous rhythm. We were careful, cautious, but the tension grew harder to hide. A brush of his hand when passing me in the hall. The way his gaze lingered a moment too long when David was speaking. The soft smile he gave me when no one else was looking. I found myself caught between dread and desire, living two lives at once. By day, I was David's wife, sharing meals, making plans, laughing at his stories. By night, I was a woman haunted by the memory of Ethan's touch, aching for it even as I told myself to resist. The passion has a way of carving its own path, and resisting became impossible. One evening, David had fallen asleep on the couch. While watching television, I covered him with a blanket, kissed his forehead, and turned to see Ethan watching me from the kitchen doorway. Our eyes met, and without a word we knew. I followed him down the hall into the shadows where we could no longer hear the steady sound of David's breathing. What happened next was inevitable, unstoppable. It was the kind of love that burned even as it destroyed, that made every second feel both precious and dangerous. Afterward, as I lay with him, my heart was both heavy and light. Heavy with the weight of betrayal, but light with the knowledge that for once, I felt truly alive. He whispered that he loved me, the words tumbling out as though they had been trapped inside him for years. I wanted to say it back, and though my lips formed the words silently, I couldn't let them escape into the air where they might shatter everything. Still, deep inside, I knew it was true. I loved him. Not with the safe, steady kind of love I had once given David, but with the kind of love that was dangerous, urgent, unstoppable. A love that lived in the stolen glances, the secret touches, the moments where the world seemed to disappear and only we existed. Every day after that became a balancing act between two lives, one built on duty, loyalty, and promises made. The other built on fire, longing, and a truth too raw to share. And with each passing moment, the line between them blurred until I could no longer tell if I was living a lie with David or if the lie was pretending that Ethan and I were not meant to be. The risk of discovery was always there, hanging over, used like a blade, but even that fear wasn't enough to stop what we had begun. Because my heart had chosen long before I admitted it to myself. It had chosen Ethan, and there was no going back. The days that followed became a blur of caution, of small gestures masked in normalcy, of lives lived under a veil so thin it felt as though one word, one slip could tear it apart completely. Ethan and I became experts at restraint in the daylight, only to lose ourselves in reckless abandon whenever the world wasn't watching. A stolen kiss in the garage when he came home late from work. His hand brushing mine under the table, hidden from David's eyes. The briefest moments of closeness that would have seemed ordinary to anyone else, but carried enough electricity to leave me trembling for hours afterward. I would wake in the mornings with David beside me, his arms slung lazily across my waist, his breathing even and deep. And though I had once found comfort in that warmth, it had turned into something unbearable because in those moments, I longed for Ethan. I longed for the way his touch was never passive, never routine, always filled with urgency, as though he feared time itself would tear us apart. My guilt should have outweighed everything, but instead it became background noise, muted beneath the roar of what I felt whenever I was near him. One evening, after a family dinner, the tension nearly broke us. David had gone to bed early, exhausted from work, and I was left in the kitchen washing dishes. Ethan came in quietly, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair messy from the long day. He reached past me to put something away, and his hand lingered on the small of my back just a second too long. I froze, water dripping from my hands, my heart slamming against my ribs. When I turned, our faces were inches apart. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was thick, our breaths mingling, every nerve in my body pulled toward him. And then it happened. His lips were on mine, firm, urgent, pulling me into him as though he'd been starved. I let myself drown in it, let myself forget everything except the taste of him, the way his body pressed against mine, the way his hands anchored me like I might float away. We broke apart only when we heard a sound upstairs, David shifting in bed. My entire body shook, my chest heaving as Ethan whispered against my ear, "I can't stop. I don't want to." I should have stopped him then. I should have told him it was over, that what we were doing was tearing apart the very foundation of our lives, but instead I whispered back, "Neither do I." From that moment, our secret became more dangerous. We no longer confined ourselves to fleeting touches. We stole whole nights. When David traveled for work, Ethan and I claimed the darkness for ourselves. His room became our world, a place where time slowed and guilt dissolved into whispers, gasps, into love that felt too consuming to be wrong. Those nights were intoxicating. I memorized the way he looked at me, the way he said my name like it was something sacred, the way he touched me as though he wanted to write me into his skin, and yet by day the guilt tightened its grip. I watched David laugh over breakfast, talk about his projects, his plans for the future, his trust in me, his wife, and I knew that every smile I gave him, every nod, every word was a lie. But when Ethan brushed against me, when our eyes met, across a room filled with people who had no idea, I also knew that love was not something you could choose. Love chose you, and it had chosen him for me, no matter how forbidden. The danger only made it more real. One afternoon while David worked in the study, Ethan passed behind me in the living room and deliberately let his fingers trail across mine. It lasted only a second, a touch so subtle it could have been an accident, but it sent heat racing through me. I had to excuse myself, go into the bathroom, lock the door, and study my breathing. When I caught sight of myself in the mirror, my reflection startled me, my cheeks flushed, my lips swollen from kisses stolen the night before, my eyes holding a glow I couldn't hide anymore. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed. And though fear coiled tighter inside me, though I told myself this couldn't last forever, I still clung to it. Because every time Ethan whispered that he loved me, every time his arms wrapped around me in the quiet dark, I believed him. I believed us. One night, long after David had gone to bed, I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, my hand tangled in his hair as he rested his head against my chest. The rain tapped against the window, the world beyond blurred in silver shadows, and, for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people alive. I pressed my lips to his temple and whispered words I had been too afraid to say aloud. "I love you." He lifted his head, his eyes burning into mine. "Then let's stop hiding. Let's find a way." I wanted to believe there could be a way. That love this powerful could survive the fire it had been born from. But I also knew that with every stolen night, we edged closer to a breaking point. A truth like ours could not stay hidden forever. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. Not the risk. Not the guilt. Not the inevitable consequences. All that mattered was that he was mine and I was his in a world where love had crossed every boundary and still burned too brightly to be denied.